Hello, everyone. Welcome to the SDI Masterclass. Over the past few months, we've been running these masterclasses online, and we've had the pleasure of having many local or international filmmakers joining us. My name is Alex, and I work at SDI and also behind the scenes of the masterclasses recently. And I've found these events really inspiring and thought-provoking. So I'm really delighted to host the session today with Alastair Cole. His most recent documentary, Iorram, or Boat Song, just had its world premiere at Glasgow Film Festival earlier this month, and we thought it would be a great opportunity to talk about his experience of making the first feature-length documentary entirely in Scottish Gaelic. I hope you've all had a chance to watch the film from the link we sent out before by registering to this event, but if not, you still have a chance to do so after the event, as the film has just been released in virtual cinemas in UK and Ireland. I'll post the link in the chat box. Could I ask please to mute your microphones just until we have this conversation, because it can be a bit disruptive if we have any kind of background noise and things like that. So I'll kickstart the conversation with a few questions, and then about 30 minutes in or so, we'll open up to everyone here in the meeting. You can ask questions or post comments in the chat box here on Zoom in the meantime, and I'll read them out. Or you can also ask directly in the meeting by unmuting yourself. So yeah, I think we can just get into it. And I'd just like to start by asking you, Alastair. So first of all, welcome.
Thanks.
And I'd just like to invite you to just tell us a bit more about yourself, about your work and your experience in making films and documentary films.
Great, no, thank you, Alex, and thanks for having me. Thanks for putting on this session. So yeah, as Alex mentioned, my name is Alastair Cole. I'm based here in Edinburgh, so it's especially nice to be here, although slightly strange not to be there at the UCA doing this. But I'm a documentary filmmaker. I've just released my second feature documentary film, and sort of I made quite a lot of shorts before then. But also, I'm, I suppose, a bit specific in that I make a lot of films about language. I have an interest in language and subjects around language and society, and it also stems from a lot of my films are based in academia as well. So I lecture at Newcastle University, but I also, my films act as what we call practice-based research, but so they're films for the world and for festival worlds and for broadcast. But also I suppose they have a second function in trying to explore specific areas through filmmaking and through documentary film. And for me, I've always been really interested in subjects around language. It stems from a kind of a background in anthropology as well, and linguistic anthropology. And it's led to the situation where I make a lot of films in languages I don't necessarily speak. And it's been a really interesting journey in doing that, I think. So yeah, hopefully it gives people a bit of an idea about where I'm coming from.
Yes, I was going to ask actually about some of your other work as well. So both Colors of the Alphabet, your previous film, and Iorram focus on these stories around issues surrounding language. And can you tell us a bit more about why, kind of how are you using documentary also in these kind of issues?
Yeah, I think one of the reasons I was really fascinated by this relationship between, or the capacity of documentary film to explore subjects around language, is that, you know, there's an inherent, the nature of subjects within language and society. You know, language is not just a vocal thing. It's to be seen and it's to be explored. And a lot of subjects, for instance, Colors of the Alphabet is, you know, it was about mother tongue education, and it was shot in Zambia over the course of a year, but it was filmed inside a classroom, and it was the story of 3 children over their first year at school. And that, you know, the bigger kind of themes around mother tongue education and experience of language and experience of learning in a language for the first time are inherently, documentary films a very good vehicle to explore that. And similar with Iorram, you know, at the heart of this film is themes around oral history preservation and the value of a language and the connection of a language with the place and the people of today. And again, what a creative documentary film in that regards can often open up is opportunities to creatively explore and do things that maybe written text can't, that say radio can't, that they do things in different ways. And I think that's where my interest in using documentary film to explore these subjects that I was interested in came from, and thinking a little bit that, you know, there's something in the very nature of the themes that I was curious about that documentary film lent itself very well to explore.
And you mentioned that when you were filming some of these documentaries, you weren't speaking the language necessarily. So I was wondering, yeah, how it was like, especially for I assume Colors of the Alphabet. How do you manage that? What are the challenges?
I mean, strangely, Colors of the Alphabet, out of all my films, was one I understood a bit more of the language. But my previous shorts as well, that I made a short in Finland that was in Finnish and Swedish, and a short across the Balkans that was in about 9 different languages. And, you know, it adds a really interesting dynamic, difficult dynamic, challenging ethical dynamic as well. With Colors of the Alphabet, I did actually have a pretty good grasp on Nyanja, one of the languages in the classroom. But it was such a multilingual context. It was a community language, and there's a lot of Bemba spoken as well, and these are all Zambian languages, and you know, that added a really, you know, a specific dynamic to that film. And as with any sort of multilingual filmmaking, it from the very start of the film, it becomes a really big element in how you make the film, and it becomes a big element in even choosing as a filmmaker. So, you know, there's great positives in this, and making films in this. It breaks out limits that you might otherwise have, sort of the limits of your language, maybe the limits of your world if you want. And so if you're prepared to go beyond that, then there's some really fascinating stories. And for me, obviously, the fact that my films are also about language, and they're also about the subjects that you know, inherently they end up being in other languages. But it also, you know, and on a personal level, it's really interesting. You spend such a lot of time when you're making a film in an edit suite, listening and editing and engaging, that you inherently learn a huge amount, and you're learning a lot about the languages that you're working in, which is a wonderful journey. But you know, there's a really big question that comes with doing that, and it's sort of, you know, why should I be making this story? Why am I doing this? And I think we all go through that as filmmakers, asking that question of whether we should be doing this, and it's right that we're asking, and I think it's really right that we ask these questions of ourselves, and often we, you know, there's conclusions that we shouldn't. But for me, I suppose I also bring this specific interest and research background and understanding, I suppose, around you know, a lot of the theoretical and territory around these subjects, and I think also there's a question of who the film's for, where that relates to. So if you are making a film that is for a foreign audience, that's going to be subtitled, that's going to, you know, it's obviously for a local audience as well, but there's different audiences that you need to ask yourself. It comes with a, you know, a position that you can maybe bring something to that subject. And with both Iorram and Colors of the Alphabet, I think that was a priority, and that we wanted to make, you know, we learned during the process, basically, we learned that we were making the first feature film ever in Scottish Gaelic, and that was an anomaly. It was a bit of an anomaly of the nature of the archive and of the nature of the films before. Obviously, anyone that's in Scotland will know that BBC Alba do an amazing job of, you know, of Gaelic broadcast. They do great TV docs. They do a lot of work. We sort of dug around and realized that there wasn't a fully 100% Gaelic documentary that had gone out in cinemas and that was made for cinemas. That was a creative doc. So that became an interesting, you know, an interesting point that we discovered along the way, but it wasn't necessarily the objective of what we were doing. But we were always trying to make a Gaelic film for a non-Gaelic audience as well. And that's, you know, we're at the early part of the release, and we're starting to discover that, and it's in 30 odd cinemas around England, and we're starting to see, you know, it's a very different response that an audience has. So we were fortunate as well with Iorram that it was that, you know, fortunate we had BBC Alba on board as a partner. And then as an anomaly of COVID and the release and all these things, it actually went out in a shorter form on BBC Alba on Hogmanay in an 89-minute. But actually what it meant was we had this version that went out directly to the Gaelic audience in the islands who were involved, whose families were the voices in the film, you know, who were, in a way, we always joked it was a bit of a cast and crew screening, but it was really, you know, a version that went to them first. And then we were able to turn our attention a wee bit to saying, how does this film communicate to an international or non-Gaelic speaking audience? And that was, you know, that was the goal with the film. So that brought us right back to the original intentions of the film, and how you make it, and how you translate it, and how you go through this massive process that is working through, in that film, tens and tens of hours of archive audio, getting it ready to make, and with something like Colours of the Alphabet, where we had sort of 100 hours of rushes in languages that we needed to process. And I suppose the other thing is, it's never just me in the production. You know, we have producers, we have editors, and inevitably they often don't. You might have a situation where an editor doesn't speak the language of the film, but the filmmaker does. So I think it can crop up a lot, and it does require this, the starting point where you ask yourself, cripes, what am I doing? And also, should I be doing it? And then thinking about what you're bringing to it, like anywhere, and I suppose taking it really seriously. I think that's one thing I have learned from all this, that it's, you know, language and what we do, especially around working in foreign languages that are going to be projected in with subtitles. You know, there's a representational issue that underpins it all. You know, mistranslation is misrepresentation in documentary film, and for us as filmmakers, we have to kind of, you know, work with that and take it very, very seriously around how we translate things and how we work from the start of production. And unfortunately, it normally means budget lines and expenses and teams and people. So there's a lot to build into it, and it comes at the start of a project.
Yeah, I was wondering actually if you'd like to play the trailer, because
I think it'd be useful. We can
be useful for everyone to see.
So this is the trailer for Iorram for the UK trailer.
Het er toch wel een goede vacht was een kraam of zo. Goede vacht, kom maar. Oh, bueno, nou gaan we het maar.
Dan is het doorgebleven, had je ook moe.
Rachén.
Rachén, dat gaat niet meer zijn. Ga niet meer eens een broer maar zo. Nee, je kan veilig kunt zijn.
Alles de tien zijn er maar toch zeggen de Scott, de BL4. We vragen de hoog, de drui. Goed, vergen de skipperis. Kurson op de stad, je toch al te vragen voor drijven in Scott. Ianje sasje, naar een misje generatie, de schia, bounder ginelle en een niche en nog.
Lady Yancy, Lady Yancy, Lady Yancy, Daram.
I suppose I could give a little bit of context to people that maybe haven't seen the film, and that the film, like we said, was is the first cinema doc in Scottish Gaelic, but it's comprised entirely of sound archive. It's a repository of sound archive that has been basically in the School of Scottish Studies archives in Edinburgh University, and also on Cana House, which is an amazing archive up in the islands. And it stems from a lot of sound recorders, ethnographers that went up to the islands in sort of 40s and 50s with the first portable sound recorders, sound recording devices, and just did an incredible amount of audio recording and captured just what absolute incredible repository and troves of archive, of song, of stories. And over the last sort of 15 years, it's been getting digitalized by the university, which is going from wire recordings to tape recordings, all to digital artifacts that we could kind of work with. And it's been with all archive projects, they're massive projects and they often get to a stage where the archiving's done, but actually it's to see the wider world. So we work with the archive to build on a concept that we really had for this film, was that what would happen if a film was entirely, everything you heard was sound archive and everything you saw was contemporary observation, and how could they speak to each other to tell a lot more about the history that is there in the present in the islands, and when you and both the people and the places and the boats.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and that was a question I had, and I see that it's popped up in the chat box as well, about this decision to use oral histories and the archive, and specifically this particular archive. Were there others that you were considering, and also whether you consider using the voices of contemporary Gaelic speakers as well?
Yeah, I mean, so the project stemmed from an academic kind of interest in an academic partnership with a lecturer called Magnus Course, who's at the University of Edinburgh, and he was doing a lot of research around fishing in Gaelic and the interrelationship and sort of the importance of the Gaelic language for the fishing industry and fishing for the Gaelic world. And we actually made a short film in development of this. So we sort of made a development short to use some money to also get money into the project to start things moving. And we were able to get money for a sort of impact-driven short that was very much directed at Holyrood. It was directed at policymakers around having the voice of the fishermen, and the argument that that Gaelic is a really important thing to consider, the Gaelic language and culture, in any decisions around the marine environment of Scotland. And that also to say, you know, the fishermen are some of the biggest and strongest environmentalists you can find. And that was one thing we sort of learned through the project. But what that meant was we had the short film at the outset before we started this. And while I was beginning to film, we made this film that was more traditional, if you want, that the fishermen were talking. It was all in Gaelic again. And it was genuinely made for Holyrood. And we kind of it got on BBC Alba, and it won an award. And it wasn't a festival film in any regards. It was designed to have a function. But that film's out there. So it's called Our Father's Sea. And it's literally a development short for this project. And while I was making it, I really wanted, you know, I was exploring sound archive outside of this. I was very interested in sound archive, I suppose, because, you know, a lot of you might think back to 5 years ago, there was a massive explosion in visual archive docs. You know, people sort of discovered visual archive in a way over the last 10 years. And it's been wonderful. And it's been really, here in Scotland, there's been some great examples, you know, from Scotland with Love, and these sort of films are really beautiful examples of creatively using visual archive. But I suppose from my interest in language, from a general interest in sound archive, I was wondering what was possible, what was the equivalent to be done with sound archive? Could you treat sound archive the same? And this sort of fell together with this fishing project we were doing. And when I realized this archive was there, this was an opportunity to test that a little bit. And in a way, a concept, maybe you might start from a concept of what would happen. You know, what if we just heard sound archive and we just saw contemporary visuals? Could this do a job of exploring history in the present that we wanted to do with this film? And you know, I made a 20-minute proof of concept to try that out. And from that proof of concept, I'd already filmed a lot for the short, and so I had this material, and I sort of kept filming this portrait that I was doing in the islands, and that 20-minute got key people on board to help the film get made. You know, Adam Daughtry is the producer of the film, and he, you know, was generous and liked the concept and got involved. Colin Money, who's the editor, got involved. Aidan O'Rourke, who's the musician, they got involved on the back of that. And it was a creative. It stemmed from both the you know, the argument that we wanted to make, but also a creative response to that, and a bit of a creative experiment. You know, and I was fortunate that sort of approach also suits academia quite well, because there's certain questions you can ask within practice-based research, what we do, that they will, you know, to be able to do both, you know, explore a theme in a subject and create impact through that, but also test a few limits of sound archive within documentary film is a really good way for me to be able to do what I do. So that's how it started. And so, yes, absolutely, using the voice of contemporary Gaelic speakers is important. We did that in the short. It was a conscious decision to limit this film to see what would happen if we didn't. You know, and we were strict about it. We had options. At the very end of the film, for those of you who've seen it, you see visual archive for the first time as well. And at the same time, we also had an option why, you know, people were asking us when they were watching cuts, why aren't you putting archive images in there? But we didn't on purpose. as a test to you know to see what could happen. And the more we got into the edit, the more we realized this is actually an interesting cinematic experience, and it was immersive, and we wanted people to be able to sit back and be washed over by the stories, and you know, to have them coming in off the wind, if you want, and to be experiencing an immersive world, and to experience the sound of the language which is incredible. And the archive itself gave you this amazing, you know, they weren't professionally recorded. They were sitting in kitchens. They were, a lot of the time, there's a lot of the context of how they were recorded, the time they were recorded, the people that recorded them tied up in their archive. So you hear it, which is really interesting, but it also means that you can create this sound world, hopefully, of the past as well. And we tried to keep a lot of that in the texture of the audio as well.
Yes, I really like that, having the different kind of sound textures as well, and also the kind of various songs and that came up, and also using the photos at the end, kind of bringing a visual element as well. Mm-hmm.
I suppose, I mean, that was the point that, with a film like this, you need to be able to open quite strongly and close quite strongly. And we were lucky with the opening that we had Sully McLean, who had been recorded in the archive, and, you know, his voice for a lot of Scots is synonymous with, his poetry definitely is synonymous with Gaeldom and the Gaelic language, and also his voice. And he had some really amazing recordings of him speaking. So we were able to open with, to set a tone with a very poetic voice that would sort of hopefully bring you into the world, into that, and let you sit back and explore it. And at the same time, the ending, it's because you're not going on a big narrative arc. The journey, you're walking through themes. It's a very act-based structure that we were trying to work with, but not in the sense that you have a core protagonist that you're dragging through. It's very much experiential, and the end needed to leave you in a certain place. And the sound we had, I mean, the song at the end was important, and it hopefully, I mean, we hope in the cinemas when we get a chance to put it there, it will have an even stronger effect. But the song at the end is Feravata, which is O Boatman, and it's a very famous sort of Gaelic song, but the recording is very specific and very unique, and that combined with the archive images, we hope leaves a fairly emotional and lasting impression on people about the beauty and what's at stake when we talk about Gaelic, and when people are talking about statistically what's at stake, and the speakers are dropping, and these, which are the headlines you see, which are true, and it's a difficult moment, but there's also a lot more than just numbers and economics at stake, and it's livelihoods, and it's cultures, and it's history, and it's oral history, and it's everything that comes with it. So I think hopefully the film adds to that conversation a wee bit.
I was going to ask as well, what were the challenges in making this film in terms of putting the pieces together, and how did you work with the kind of archive and the footage, finding sort of the film's rhythms? And
yeah, it was, I mean, I was really lucky with Colin Money on board, who is a remarkable editor, and particularly lucky because he's got a strong connection to the Gaelic world, as children and Gaelic education. He sort of, there was an obvious interest for him in getting on board with the project. He'd also worked on my previous film, so we had worked together before, and we sat down and we had this sort of 20-minute concept that we started with that I mentioned, and then we had to figure out, we almost started from scratch at that point, but I had been, for the previous 2 years, been trawling through this sound archive. So we had this massive collection of sound archive, which I look back and it's, it's just files and files of notes and papers and me listening, because I could go through the archive. It had been organized in a way that an English speaker could see the headlines and understand what the pieces were generally about. So I could pull out anything in relation to fishing, we thought, or subjects that we maybe wanted to touch on. And you sort of aim to get a very long assembly of sound. But that assembly, what we got subtitled and draft translated was about 20 hours of subtitling, another 10 or 20 hours of interpreted, which I can explain how we did if people are interested, the kind of logistics of doing it. And then you're at a massive, they're basically the rushes you're working with, and you start to cut that down. And we from them, I worked into themes. So we really tried to it was about 24 or 26 themes, I think, that we could see within the sound archive specifically. and we really mapped out that sound first, knowing full well that there were scenes and material that I had already shot that would match up very specifically, that I had in mind when I had the story in mind when I shot it, or that by coincidence or design it was going to be a good fit. But there were also others that weren't, and we didn't know where they would fit. So hopefully, when if knowing that, I think you, as a filmmaker, maybe if you watch it again, then you'll get a sense of these themes that we're working with. And as you do with films, you have these amazing multicolored post-it note boards, and that was based around working between death and family and sisterhood and hearing gutting, and going through these subjects that we knew were in there. And there's the archive itself, in one subject there may be 10 different stories cut into it. So we would use a lot of small pieces of archive and try and piece them together that way, and then find the overall structure. So once we sort of had these themes and the songs that maybe worked with them, we would start to find a general, a vague kind of act structure that we could bring it through and take the audience on a journey of a sense. But it's not a traditional one. It's not, you're not going, like I mentioned before, it's not a protagonist-led journey, it's an emotional one. And so that was important to have that first act function in a way that you could set up what's going on, that a viewer could actually understand where, because it's quite a disorientating film in a way to have to sit and watch. We didn't give text at the start on the Scottish version, which was conscious, which was to let people kind of be confused a little bit and to settle into it. And on the television we did because it becomes, someone won't see the synopsis and they'll see it straight away. For the international, we are putting text on the front for just there's not an inherent understanding of where the islands are or the language, the nature of the Gaelic language. But we set things up that in that first act you would understand hopefully what's going on, a lot about the fishing world, and then you would start to kind of delve into the bigger themes of death and loss. And then really to come around at the end of the film, it was about oral history, and it's about the universals of storytelling, and that underpins so much of the archive, but also the Gaelic culture. And so to start bringing in the Cayley and the fantasy that's there as well, but also the myth and the mythology and that was really important to keep in there because it's brilliant. And the stories of mermaids and fairies and witches and crabs are totally, they're great. I love them, but you need to find a way into them as well. And so that there's about 80 to 90 different clips, I think, audio clips in the film, 50 different voices, I think 50 or 60 different voices. So it's a real patchwork in that sense, but the structure was those 3 acts, and then within that about 26 themes that you're kind of working through without really knowing it, hopefully. But yeah, and I mean, I suppose the big question was actually, which was you mentioned, was about linking the images in archive, and that's, we could, if we wanted to show a clip for people who haven't, I think there's a clip there that maybe gives a good example of the different types of approaches we use, the 3 brothers clip there. That's, this is about 4 minutes, but this is a clip from sort of the end of the first act where you're shifting from themes around a belief and traditional belief and into what we had a wee bit of really well told stories, really emotional stories that were often from first-hand accounts, and then also the use of song of how we did that. So this gives you a bit of an idea of the different elements we're working with, and I can talk afterwards about how we treated the visuals with them.
Semmoinen olemme vähän, se on jo priin, se on jo hukkuudesta puhut. Takakoro heräsin ilpeen, halviin puhut tänään. Tänne on Frank. Noi jo asho, vaan muurana se tois. Sen jättä sano hummalasta ykön, eli kiema yli halva, hulle hoise sen. Hulle tänne vastoisin. Kröi meidän tänne kahumma, toi. Se on hänet jo lohtakava sokonen taiti, jos liikki toi raada, savuunahti liikki toi. Hahasin. Tää hypnat riisi, ei dröp mä jedy. Ainakaan huona haddana hiin. Vetellikällä mä. Kalavää ja tuumar pääs. Harikkimisena hamaga medikä hai dynny mä jedy.
Stúr var kanske det att kolla på tungan och alla vid våga. Så var det tog. Hon måste bara ha kis och kan vi färga alla vid våga. Det känns för kul.
Det var en hierskoch halt en leus met jullie neuwen ziel. We doen hierskoch maken post niet. Agus je blieuw nanjev dat het eerskel de gauw. Gij moet je niet door eregen. Een nee gekiezen. Dus we show. Wij rekenen het jaar met de vorst. Agus we pallen voor fijne chien. We daar het chien TSD chien. De nane je skipper de bord doen maken hasselig. Doen cool. De skipper de le waar vragen alles te chien is je. Ko je de wat je woer vorst niet. Lo ska hol bud eklos ga je herisch. Als de chien zijn de wat zeggen de ska de BL4. We vragen de hoog kunnen drukken. Gaat de stad alles te hoger toch zeggen. Nu ga je zeggen dat je gaat op dingen van is. Dan gaat er eindelijk stjorlen. Goed, vergen de skuperisch. Alles te. Korson op de stad toe. Je gaat toch wel te vragen voor de ruiming te sko. Ianya sashi, neramisha jian vishin, shia boundary hinelle, en een niche en nog. En je een koren raar.
So hopefully that gives a bit of a sense of, I mean, the different types of archive that we had in there, and also the links that suddenly you had with the archive. So that song that you heard at the end is from the perspective of a lady who's lost her brothers. We had this incredible story about this guy having to leave his brother in the sea, and we had to find links there to make that work. And then at the end, the imagery is that's a boat that we filmed on quite a bit. It reoccurs through the film, and it's three guys. So they aim to get inside the head and to have you understand a bit about what's at stake and just how dangerous it is on the sea. And for those guys there at the time, it was pretty rough weather, and that danger was very real. And the responsibility of the skipper that you see today is that same sort of the same risks are there for them. And then before that, it was a bit of there's a bit more of the fairy, the introduction to the themes of fairies that we had in the film, and and even the link up with the RNLI is not, you know, it's not an accident that we put that there, you know, and people do believe in fairies, and that's great. And but at the same time, there's a, you know, there's a contemporary world that something like the RNLI is you know, saving people today in the same way perhaps the traditional belief associates with fairies. So we played with the images a lot, and hopefully you can see just from there that sometimes those pieces of archive that are totally separate, that were recorded 15 years apart, we could also find links to bring them into a single theme.
Yeah, and I was thinking actually going to the footage, kind of the present day footage, as it were. It feels, to me at least, it has this very kind of ethnographic feel, this kind of ethnographic approach of following the people, doing these kind of activities, fishing, sailing, the processing of the fish and the seafood. Was this intended from the beginning, or is this an idea of kind of capturing these activities now? Or
yeah, I mean, it was a bit intended because of the nature of the project. That the intention of the visual project was to create a visual portrait, and to have the people be at the center of it, and also I suppose because it was also getting led by the sound, it had to be used in a way. It's more on the edit as well that becomes quite ethnographic. And that had to be, you know, sometimes it would take a second position, and the archive had to be leading the visuals, and then vice versa. So you had to have that flexibility in the material. And I suppose my background is anthropology. It's only natural that's happened, I think. But I think from the start of the project, where I was filming so much, 80% of this project I'd filmed before we had a good assembly. I knew a lot of the archive that I wanted in the film but it was happening in parallel. So there were definitely shoots that I had access to that I had no idea where or how it was going to fit in the film, but I knew I wanted it, and so I had to kind of have an approach to filming, and it was over 3 years, so it's quite long term, and there was a lot of footage, you know. It was very, I suppose, based in ethnography and its approach.
I mean, I have a lot of questions, but I'm just gonna ask one more now, and kind of then we can open up to the audience. But the question, what I was also thinking about, kind of capturing these activities and the fishing, are these kind of activities in any way threatened, or is there any sort of hope that capturing this moment might not be, you know, in the future, might not happen that way?
I mean, that relates to the time we released the film. You know, it totally is threatened, and it's become a lot more threatened because of Brexit. You know, and it wasn't. We had a few options on the table for when this film would come out. We were very lucky with timing, in that I finished filming. Literally, the last shoot was early February last year, just before everything kicked off, and even more fortunately, strangely, Colin and I had organised to edit remotely in February, because I wasn't going to be in the country, and so we were literally probably the only film production in the UK that was accidentally set up for lockdown, and that we had everything ready to go. So we were able to finish it, and we were ready to probably release last year if we wanted to be, but actually the lockdown gave us a lot more time. It gave Aidan a lot more time to work on it. And we also had this understanding that Brexit could have a really big impact on the fishing industry. And what we knew already was under threat, what the guys were already struggling with up there around the economics, around not being listened to as far as a lot of policies that are coming in place, around lack of labour. There's a lot of problems that they're faced with. We're potentially going to be significantly affected by Brexit. And then it happened in a huge way. So we had a decision in December, myself and the producer, around when Glasgow went to an online festival, if we wanted to go with them. And the fact that this was on the horizon helped that decision. And it also helped the decision to go straight out into cinemas, because, you know, with all documentary films, if you can position it within a really contemporary context, if you get fortunate and that happens, that's great. You've got to run with it. And it gave a lot of context, I think, for the rest of the UK as well to view it. So, you know, people like The Guardian wanted to write about it because there was actually a real contemporary underpinning that we could explain. And it wasn't necessarily, it is there, and we're not, you know, in the international version, maybe we give a little bit more context to people, but the context was there and people's experience of watching it right now, and that there is, you know, Scottish fishing is all over the news, and it is under threat. And with that threat, it's not just the fishermen, it's the Gaelic language up there is very much under threat as a result. So I think, yeah, it's got a very contemporary context, a little bit fortuitously, but also that stems because the research that underpins it was very, you know, apt.
Thank you. Yeah, we have a question in the chat. So you mentioned you did a 20-minute proof of concept on the film project. When did this take place, and what impact did the proof of concept have on reshaping any initial ideas you had?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, it's a good question. I'm writing an academic article about that proof of concept because it was an interesting one to look back on, because it was very much just to test this idea of sound and to take some of the real good bits of the archive I'd found and to see what would happen against some of the imagery. And, you know, it happened probably after I'd filmed maybe 50 or 60% of it, or I had a lot of material, thinking I was going to, you know, I think I was developing it as I went. And then at that point, like I said, I didn't have any of the other key creative team on board, except I had a co-producer and the collaborator from University of Edinburgh. And at that point, it gave me, you know, it was the point that we went to Screen Scotland, that we went to BBC Alba. But first of all, I went to Adam Daughtry, and he came on board. You know, and his experience as a producer with archive was one of the things that led him. He's produced a lot of Mark Cousins films, and there's a certain challenge that comes with that as well, with production and archive. So that was important to have on board and to get Colin on board. But as far as filmically, it was interesting because it sets in motion a lot of ideas, right? If you do a proof of concept, you can't help but think this is working, this is not. But actually what was really important was Colin, who saw it and said, you know, he saw it and he saw his values in it, the editor, and he also thought it was rubbish at times as well, which is good. He's happy to tell me that. And it was, you know, I edited it myself. Editing wise, it is rubbish. But it gave me a little, it gave us enough ideas that we could go forward with it. And I suppose it gave us a couple of things that we could use and things that we shouldn't do. But as far as the little bits of imagery and sound that worked, it definitely was the you know, the seed of things. But we tried to start from scratch because a new editor was coming on board, and we wanted him to, you know, we wanted him to work with me and kind of, you know, start at that point as well. So it was quite a functional proof of concept. It was genuinely a proof of concept if this thing worked. I did not know for a long way into this film if this idea was going to work.
Yeah, and it is then again, yeah, a lot of the process of fundraising as well, and
yeah, you need something. The more you can get. We were lucky with this film that Screen Scotland came on board, and BBC Alba were totally brilliant, and that they were very enthusiastic, and obviously it speaks to them. But also it's a cinema doc, and you know, Adam and I went to them with this, and they were great and enthusiastic and up for the challenge. They hadn't really supported a cinema doc in the plans that we had, and only because of COVID did it actually go out broadcast first. But it was their big slot, and they had been so supportive. We weren't going to not put that out then. It was on Hogmanay, and it was a little bit of a different cut that they wanted just for their time slot. But you know, they were great, and Screen Scotland were really supportive, and you know, we're fortuitous, and we want the film to be seen. We want it to be part of this conversation that we would like to think that these sort of bodies are also supporting.
So do you think there is support for kind of Gaelic speaking cinema, or
of course,
kind of moving forward? Maybe,
you know, we're not the first ones to do Gaelic speaking cinema. The first all feature film was, you know, a film called The Inescapable Pinnacle, I think in English, and that's you know, that was 2008. But actually there hasn't been a whole lot since. There's some great shorts that are happening now. There's some great filmmakers doing things. I think more generally it's an interest. I would hope the film more generally around the UK has, opens up opportunities for for Gaelic and all the regional languages to be languages of cinema. There's no reason, and there's actually a huge reason to do it, because it's a very different perspective and very different voice and a very different story, and that story can be told from a different language. And for us to be accepting in the UK that it's absolutely fine to tell stories from here in another language. And it's not even just, it's not about Indigenous languages either. There's absolutely no reason, that a British film or a Scottish film can't be in Polish or Urdu or Italian. These are the languages that are happening here. So I think that's to be encouraged. And if it were to help with that discussion, that's great.
I think there's actually a question kind of asking about that tension between using an English language filmmaker filming outside of your native language. So to what extent would it be reasonable to suggest English speakers who want to make films in foreign languages should maybe raise funds for those films and then hand the funds over to kind of native language crews to get the projects done? The person asking this has encountered similar issues in other parts, filming about other parts.
Yeah, look, I like I said, I think it's a big question of should you be telling the story, and I think I don't want to dodge that either, because I asked myself that, and I think it comes down to a lot about what the film needs to do, and what is good for everyone involved for that film to do, and who can do that, and I think if the film is for a foreign audience, there's potential there that you can, there's something a foreign language speaker may bring to it, but at the same time, it brings with it a huge complication of you have to translate and work through masses of rushes and audio, and you need big budget lines to support that. So there is an argument to say, yeah, if you're making films in Greece and Malawi, to say maybe you can produce these and work with local filmmakers. There's other structures as well. I'm co-directing a film in Bolivia at the moment. And that's a similar kind of idea that it's also to work locally where it's appropriate. And I think every film's different, and to be creative with filmmaking structures, I think is possibly an important way to think of it as well, and to make them collaborative if they need to be, if it's in the best interest of the film. Something like Colours the Alphabet was an interesting example where that was a global issue that we were looking at, and it was me making the film in a village in Zambia. That's absolutely up for a lot of conversations, and it should be interrogated, I think, and I've gone through that process myself reflectively in writing and academia, and it was a piece of research as well, which sort of opened a few other doors, and we made sure we partnered wherever we could and had people on board. And I suppose it's that prerequisite work that has to go in if you aren't local, is to build a team around you that is supportive, that is going to make the best project possible. And for us in Colours the Alphabet specifically, it was about having traditional leaders involved, the University of Zambia involved, a massive team of interpreters and translators, everyone that we could get to consult on it, and it became a 6-year film project because of it, just to get it made, and then a lot after. But because we made it for an international audience, we were also able to, it was translated into 40 languages and just went to the UN to screen. And that's what maybe you can bring as well. And at the end of the day, that for that community, the support and minority language communities that are fighting to get education in their own languages would like to think that hopefully the film has been able to support, or will be able to, and continue to support that to happen. So again, it's intention, and it's not one size fits all. And yeah, to understand it's a tricky process, and there's absolutely no reason why you shouldn't work alongside local filmmakers if it's appropriate.
Thank you. Another question from Dean is asking, did you consider giving more context to the visuals? So titles describing locations or what was happening?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's an aesthetic choice, I think, with the cinematic nature of this as well. And I think it could have happened, but there's also, we wanted this to be about the islands as a whole. Islanders know exactly where they are. Every fisherman I've shown this to some of the fishermen, and more or less they compete with each other to name the exact bay or the exact rock that's on that film. So there's a lot of people that know exactly where everything is in that film, without any titles. But the idea of it was to have the sound archive lead you, and to not kind of distract you from that. And if we were naming the islands, you know, it's all in the Outer Hebrides, and it's all, if we were to give the place names, I think it's possible, but it may, I think for me anyway, for an audience, it would shift you into another place that maybe intellectually was interesting, and you could orientate yourself very specifically if you knew them. But for a lot of people, that wouldn't maybe help, because the difference between Bara and North Uist and Bernere and Lewis is it's the Outer Hebrides, and as a place, it was I think for external audiences, it's to see that. For the Hebrideans, absolutely, they know exactly where everything's shot. There's no hiding the Castle Bay High Street from anyone up there, and the same with shots of Stornoway and Ness. And when there were, so for instance, you saw that there was often where we would link them up. If the story was talking about Ness, we would, the footage is from the places. I covered the islands, as you know, I shot on all the inhabited islands, so we had material, and we wanted to make sure where possible we would link that up, at least in the correct island. It wasn't always totally possible, but at least if the story is from Lewis about Ness, which is a town at the north of Lewis, then we were in Lewis at least.
Thank you. I just wish to see it in the big screen. So hopefully we'll get to
yeah, I think it's an interesting point with this film, because we did, you know, it's all of us that are making films at the moment, that there's a big shift that's happened, right? Like the cinema is digital as cinema. I mean, I think we made this film with support that got it, big 5.1 mixes that we have DCPs waiting to be made, you know, but we can't, there's no point at the moment, because we don't know when it's going to go to the cinema. We have planned the release that we hope in autumn it will be in cinemas for sort of one-off events, and it's going hopefully to places like the Screen Machine and other festivals. And I think there's, you know, like there is a different, we know that, I don't need to tell anyone here that there's a difference in watching film in the cinema, but also I think there's a medium that we can keep in mind about small screen viewing as well. And this film, we were a little bit surprised. We had sort of given up when we knew it was going out on small screens. We're like, oh, this will never be the same. But actually, you know, I think we can give audiences a lot more, you know, credit. They'll create the cinematic world as well, and people have still responded really positively, which has been lovely. And in the way that we would have hoped they would have responded in the cinema, we're still seeing, which is lovely. And I think maybe we can have a little bit more hope as filmmakers that it can be done on small screens as well, and you can do both.
Thank you. Joanna is saying that the ending of the story about the 6 widows in the village was so moving, incredible oral storytelling. How did you first start visualizing what sort of non-archive footage you wanted to get to go with these stories? Did you approach shooting on location with quite a specific plan?
No, so it was a bit the opposite. I would have wanted to, and I think we're looking at a future film that I will do that in, because that would have been a lot more sensible. But for instance, the end of that story it's a very powerful song, and and we knew the song could push that emotion, like you're talking about. But also it was about getting inside the head of the fisherman. We wanted that song to be singing in his head, and we wanted to leave you with that. And it was about space and letting it happen. And I think like we talked about the anthropological approach, often you have to be patient and make sure you've got your things covered. The proof of concept maybe fed into that, because I was testing a lot of footage while I was filming. I kind of had a sense of what approach to filming was going to work, and to give us that. And then, you know, again, I had a great editor with me that we could work through to have those sort of moments that are really powerful in the story. There's a song that's going to work, but really we need the visuals. We need people to be with the visuals as well, and to feel that maybe it's potentially those 3 guys in the boat that could have lost it, and it could be their partner at home singing, and that's to have people make those connections. That was so important. So I wish I could say we planned it all when I went out filming, but it didn't happen in that order. But I did get sent back. I mean, there was about 3 shoots after we had a pretty tight cut of the audio that I got sent back up, mostly to go back in winter, because it was all far too beautiful at one point. Everything was lovely and sunny, which for those of you that have been to the islands knows that that's not quite true. And so we had to go back up, and that was quite specific. So I had a shopping list at that point of things I really needed. So it was a bit of a mix, but that was at that point it was filling in specific gaps that we were missing material of.
Thank you. Could you tell us a bit more about the music as well?
Yeah, I mean, really, this comes back to the proof of concept. So that proof of concept question was a good one, because actually one thing I forgot to mention, that proof of concept was testing the music as well. And in that, I cut a lot of the first edits with the music of Lao. And if you know, Lao is a band here in Scotland, and they're a brilliant band. They're a three-piece kind of contemporary trad group, very cinematic in their sound, led by Chris Trevor and Aidan O'Rourke. And I had them in mind musically, and we knew I wanted music to play a part in this. I thought that was a way to add another dimension, but I knew it had to work in a way that was not a normal score. And so I approached Aidan O'Rourke with the proof of concept that had his music on it, which is kind of cheeky. So I said, look, yeah, you can listen to yourself on this already. And he is from Oban, he's from the islands. That's also why I was keen to have him involved. We talked about having Lau do the soundtrack as a band, but actually it made more sense that Aidan did it for lots of reasons. And it was great because it's his first feature film, it's his first soundtrack. And as a solo musician, it's been a real journey for him, I think. So what we did, we borrowed a lot from Colin's experience from Scotland with Love. He edited that with King Creosote, and how they worked the music then was about bringing the composer in at rough cut stage. And that was always our plan. And we were lucky Aidan was up for that, and he came on board. And, when we were it was a pretty, not rough cut, a 2-hour cut out of a 90-minute film. And then he had to sit down and be prepared to start working with that. And he was feeding in themes and stories. Then we were talking about the concept. He was in the editing suite with us. He would send material back, and we started this kind of dialogue, and it was great. And it was, for me as a filmmaker, it's this period that was really a joy, and to work with people in that regards. And he was really, there's a for those of you that had access to the screener, the Modern Films link that we sent, there's actually a Q&A that I did with Aidan. I interrogated him a little bit. There's a 30-minute conversation, and he talks about how we wrote the music. And one of his techniques was actually, he used to listen to the archive by itself and respond instantly to get kind of ideas. So he was responding, and he's not a Gaelic speaker either, so he was responding to the sound of the archive. And he accompanied a lot of it. Some of it worked, some of it didn't, some of it were big accompaniments. He orchestrated this really great team of jazz musicians, a lot of them, jazz guitarists, vocalists, all sorts of things that you can do. But the key was that he was sending material back and forth, and we were able to work the edit, to work with his score, and we were able to really work with him as he went through it. And COVID helped us a lot because it freed him up a bit more to spend more time than he would have expected. And it was great, and I think it came out really, really lovely. And he's going to release the album in August, and we are, fingers crossed, going to be able to do some live screenings that sort of with 9 or 10 piece band, I think it is, that will get on stage one way or another. We'd love to do that over the next year or two, because I think the music is very particular, and it's very particular specifically at points where he accompanied the archive. Some of my favorite bits are when there's an archive voice singing, and he today is accompanying someone that was singing in their kitchen in the 1950s and going with their tune wherever it's going to go. They're running with it. So I think it's musically, for anyone that is a musician, I think that conversation with him is really interesting, and there's a lot to kind of listen to, and check out the album when it comes out, because I think it's lovely. But I would say that.
Looking really forward to it. So Flora is asking, would you do a sequel in the same theme, or are there any other Gaelic contemporary themes you came across that might be useful for more films potentially?
Yeah, we did. There was a point, I think, Adam and I kept discovering things about and it's one of these things about being an outsider, I suppose, as well, that we were discovering all the way we went along. We were just, it was a really interesting process, and we did see other stories that were really interesting. I am really interested in sound archive, and I think what this film has kind of triggered in me is perhaps a couple more projects that I'm looking at that are not necessarily based here in Scotland or in Gaelic, but are based around sound archive. And so there's a few other archives I'm talking to that we may do something with that are that we'll see. I'll see its development stages. It's one of these things. It's very hard once you release a film. You need to crack on with your next projects, but it's also, there's a lot of work to be done in getting the film out and making it happen. But I think there is a lot of stories to be told, and I think there was a real. I was very heartened personally by the, there's an amazing Gaelic media, Gaelic filmmaking community, and they've supported this, and the translation and subtitling community have been amazing, and I think they are exceptionally welcoming, and they have their stories to tell, and there's brilliant films that have been made already, especially through BBC Alba, and especially some shorts, but there's a lot more stories to tell, and I mean, it comes back to this remarkable fact that you forget that was one of the points that when we started that, Gaelic's been spoken in Scotland for over 1,000 years, well over. And it used to be spoken across all of Scotland. And I think there's an element of stories and lore and culture, and it's really, really rich and beautiful, and it's to be explored. And at the very least, you can get the Duolingo app and learn a bit of the language and start that way. But I think there's an amazing world there if filmmakers and whoever are interested to explore it.
And I think it's interesting that the film, because it's being filmed and recorded in this way, documented in a way, would also kind of be part of perhaps archive for the future. Or
well, we wanted to give something back to the archive as well. I mean, just the process of dealing with the archive. We have now big transcripts of that archive material, about 30 hours. We have that available to people to use and work with, and and like someone mentioned John Long Campbell and the kind of House Library, who were part of this, and he was one of the first archivists that went up in the 30s to record, and there's a song at the start of the film that says, there's about 5 or 6 of the songs in the film were recorded by John Long Campbell, and it is this incredible repository of history there, and it's look up kind of House Library and have an explore. It's run by the Scottish Environmental, I can't remember that. Historic Scotland, NTS. There you go. Thank you. Now is the moment that a lot of these things are getting digitalized, and there is a really amazing way in exploration that's happening. I think the Scottish Sound Archive is developing at the moment. Talbot and Dalkhurst, which is the sound archive that we used a lot for this, which is part of the School of Scottish Studies archives, is kind of getting converted hopefully at the moment. So for filmmakers, get into it. I think there's a lot more than what we did there. We just, you got to remember, I was focusing on fishing in the islands. I think and also not in Gaelic. There's a lot of Scots and Doric and English archive there as well.
And speaking of languages as well, Eleanor is asking if you met many international fishers or laborers while filming, or multilingual interactions with fishers who speak other languages other than Gaelic and English. Yeah.
So we wanted to flag that. I mean, that's flagged up in the film visually a little bit. Obviously, it's not part of the oral history there, but it was guys, especially on the trawlers. So and basically the dynamic up in the islands is largely that the Creole fishermen, so the guys you saw in the clip, are largely from the islands. It's more a 9 to 5, which means 6 a.m. to 7 p.m. sort of fishing job, but they come home at night, and that's the guys that are catching the lobsters and the crabs, and that's normally a lot of the local guys doing that, and then a lot of the trawler crew are a mix. The skippers are largely local, and a lot of the crew are a mix. And we have a couple of images that we consciously wanted to flag up the economics and the labour market that is up there. That is really, it's difficult. It's a lot of those guys they've got work, and they move around different locations, and they work as fishers in different places. But then a lot of them have found homes there, and that was one of the kind of protagonists, if you want, that you see in the trawlers, is a Polish guy, and he is kind of the first mate of one of the trawlers I was filming on. But he's lived in Stornoway for 20 years. And his kids speak Gaelic, and so there's a lot of in Cullen there's a whole team of kind of Polish guys that have been there for 20 years that own the boats there and run things. So I think the idea of foreign labour, also the idea of the fishing community that we wanted to capture, wasn't just about the Gaelic speaking community. It's the fishing community today, as it is, whoever and wherever. And to say that yes, there's a lot of the Creole guys and in the processing there's a lot of Gaelic speakers, but actually on the trawlers there's a bit much more of a mix, but that community today is still underpinned by this history, and it's still underpinned by the language and the culture, and it's embraced by a lot of those guys, because why not? A lot of them are brilliantly multilingual anyway. They've come to Scotland and learn English and are speaking Romanian or Polish or whatever, and they're embracing it as well. So I think they are part of the community, and embraced up there as well. So I think that was a really lovely side to it, but it's tough, and it's tough economically. The job market's tough. It's tough to find work, and there's a story. We actually found a really interesting story in the archive around that, and it was a guy, you know, talking in the 40s and 50s about trying to get work. So that is, in a strange way, something that came back up from the archive, that we were able to use the archive to tell a bit of a contemporary tale in some ways as well.
Thank you. And we have another question from Angus, who said that the film has many emotional and personal tales about the dangers of the sea and those who lost friends and family, and these come across very powerful but not morbid. How did you find this balance?
Yeah, it's because we didn't, it is tricky, and it was a lot to do with translation as well, and it's a lot of how they're told. I think, you know, Scotland's a country of storytellers. The Gaels are no different, and there was some brilliant storytelling that did that job already. Others came down to editing, and you know, we had to edit the stories a lot to make them fit. We're offered 20-minute stories to fit into the space that we needed, and we worked. So, you know, we had this translation team with us through the whole project. They were working with us on that, and it was. But you're totally right. It wasn't about death as a theme. It's there. Death is part of what the sea brings to the islands. Unfortunately, you know, it's no accident when you go up there, you see some of the houses don't have windows to the sea, because traditionally some of the old houses wouldn't do that, because the sea, as much as it provides life and provides work, it also takes family, and so it's that loss is a part of it, but loss doesn't need to be morbid. And I think even in the clip that you saw, summarized a lot of the end of that song, sort of says there's no time for weeping. I think, and that's a bit of the theme that you felt through the archive, that people were faced with this and faced with tragedy that would, you know, tragedy that would wipe off almost all the fishing capable men that were out fishing in one go on some islands, and they would have to relocate from the islands. You know, there'd be 15 people living on an island, suddenly 6 men drown, and you have stories of that, and it's really difficult to hear, and you realize the extreme nature of that. But there is also an incredible hardiness that came through with the archive that it takes to live there, and I think we tried to capture that, and we didn't want to dwell on the morbidness of it, but it was still needed to be atmospheric, and we needed to feel this. We needed audiences to feel, have a response and feel their way through the film, I suppose.
Thank you. Nicole is interested in kind of working on documentary from an anthropological background or approach. So do you have any advice for how somebody in Scotland in particular, at the very beginning of acquiring those kinds of knowledge and skills, especially kind of working with a smartphone or something more basic, any advice?
Yeah, I think anthropology is an interesting subject fundamentally, I studied anthropology because I was making documentary films and thought it was a great way to learn more and understand more about subjects that I wanted to make films about. Not necessarily the way that anthropology makes films. I think anthropology over the years has tied itself in knots in how it makes films. Ethnographic filmmaking can be massively, overanalyzed and over determined in how it's made. I think there's some really great stuff as well, really interesting creative filmmaking. And in academia more broadly, there's really interesting filmmaking happening that does consciously have to push boundaries. But what anthropology does do, in the same way, say, cultural studies does, or other areas, it brings you into, it gives you subjects, and there's some brilliant research that's happening, and it's really interesting stuff to read and explore. So if you do, if you are in that world, then one of the key things that for me was to find this world of linguistic anthropology that I was interested in, and to use that as a way to also find the stories I wanted to spend 4 years of my life making films about. And with a short film, it's often at least a year of your life. So, and I always found that when I was, making films to start with, it's really hard to find those stories that you want to make the films about, because there's a lot of options. You've got to know, you've got to be committed. And that was one way that sort of the anthropological perspective helped me. As far as the technical kind of acquiring the skills, it's always about doing, it's always about trying. And I think most people here in this call that have made films will, will recollect their first films and probably won't show them to many people now. I wouldn't show too many people mine. But you've got to learn through that, and you've got to learn through doing, and you've got to get out there and do it, and never underestimate how that people are really interested to hear from you, to be asked and to be engaged with, and to most people don't get films made about them, and if you have a subject you're interested in and done your research and understand and are passionate about, there's no reason you can't make it any way possible. And if it's with a smartphone, there's lots of ways to do that, and there's lots of platforms to put that out on as well, I think. So it always sounds corny to say just go and do it, but you kind of need to, but more importantly, to find the subjects that you care enough to keep reading after the film's made.
Any tip? I mean, I really like the images from the sea, kind of filming just in the sea. That was amazing to see. How was that challenging, or how did that go?
To be on the boat, you mean?
Just in the sea, kind of.
Underwater.
Underwater, yeah.
Yeah, so that's not. I didn't do that. So the drone and the underwater stuff shot by an amazing woman called Lindsay Brown, who is a Scottish cinematographer, who some of you may know, and she is also a filmmaker, and you should check out her films. They're great. And she, she is. I think she works under Stray Seal as her name, but it was amazing. It was really amazing to have her footage and to realize it was a key part. We always knew we wanted it underwater, and it was a question of how we were going to have that material. But she had done a lot of work up there and around the seas around Scotland and around the islands, so had this amazing material and was very cinematic. And we only used however many minutes in the whole film, but they were key to keep you in this, to keep you in the cinematic, but also to keep you in the otherworldly nature of a lot of this. A lot of those moments where we went underwater were when we were talking about, it might have been mermaids or fairies and these things, and to keep the mystical nature of those themes of the stories alive. The underwater world gives you that, and it's totally. I mean, at the very end of the film, there's a shot of something called an electric gooseberry jellyfish, which some of you may know, or probably not. And it's the most remarkable thing you've ever seen. It's a little ball that's got electric running through it, lights flashing. We did not do that in post. It was there, and I think that underwater world gave us that. It gave us visually that what was in the sound archive around mythology and mystery and fairies and which is in belief, in traditional belief, but the underwater world visually helped hugely with that.
Thank you. We have a question from Patrick, who's saying, as an anthropologist, what would you identify as the specifics of the Outer Hebrides versus other places, New Zealand even?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
I think. I mean, this was where it started from. It was this also the relationship with the language and the culture, I think, is really unique, and it's interrelationship with fishing, and that the fishermen, especially the Creole fishermen, now 75% of them were Gaelic speakers versus about 50% of the islands. So I think that was quite unique, and I think it's tying up with traditional knowledge. Like, it's kind of in the anthropology, or academia, it's termed traditional environmental knowledge, and it's really strong there. That was what I found really fascinating and important. It's not just the fishermen will know places and locations and fish and parts of the sea that no one else will, because it's passed down through the Gaelic language and through their knowledge. And that is a really strong sense that you get there. We'll be out fishing, and there'll be an old guy going out on a small little boat with no, with a life jacket and nothing else really. And the guys tell me that he'll get more lobsters than anyone because he's the only one that knows the spots. But then you realize it's also, and that's, through knowledge that's passed down, but then it actually extends to, say, when I was filming with the Barda lifeboat crew, they were explaining that actually if it's a Gaelic fisherman that gets in trouble, the first thing they do is make sure their coxswain, who's the driver of the lifeboat, is a Gaelic speaker, because it's far quicker and far more important that they can communicate in Gaelic, because the language is tied to the place and where they're going, so they can explain it without a shadow of a doubt. It's very exact, very precise, where and what's going on. And, I think that is very, very strong in the Outer Hebrides. And somewhere like New Zealand, I think, I'm looking at a project in New Zealand at the moment around oral history, not around fishing so much, but the links to Indigenous language and culture is really strong in New Zealand as well, but it's a lot more tied to the land, I'd say. But that knowledge is still there. And I think it's you know, a lot of this film comes back to bigger discussions around ecology and environmental activism and the place of language and traditional knowledge in that. And we would hope that this actually, you know, this is a point that people need to be, you know, if people can take that from the film, that it's the fishermen that are the biggest environmentalists we met in the whole project, and they want to be part of any discussions around that. And you know, there's a lot of territory in places that they weren't fishing consciously because, you know, they knew traditionally that they wouldn't touch it, and they had between themselves to organise. So it was, yeah, I think the Outer Hebrides is a unique fishing community, but like you said, it relates to the rest of Scotland. The stories that we had from that were about the East Coast were great, and a lot of them were people travelling. The Herring Girls, which was a big theme in the film, which stemmed, you know, to be fair, the Herring Girls were there. For those that you don't know, there was a big herring run that used to go around Scotland. There was big groups of workers that would go to the Outer Hebrides and start in Butter and go all the way around. But it was also where a lot of the Hebridean women would go and work, and they would follow it around, and they were working as fish gutters, as herring gutters and curers, and they would go to Fraserburgh and all down. And it's, you know, it's a brilliant part of history here. And we had, because of when it was recorded, this archive was recorded in the 40s and 50s, that those stories were there, and they were the voice of the woman that we needed in the film. We knew from the start that this couldn't just be the voice of male men fishermen, because that's not the community and that's not the history. The history is absolutely tied into what's happening on land and the processing. And we knew visually we had that with the processing, but through the oral history, it came especially through the herring stories, which are totally brilliant and very funny. And, you know, like, I mean, I think it's probably worth, if you want to, there's a story that we couldn't put in the film. And this actually relates to archive a lot, because archive, all this project is around archive, and understanding the limits of archive is really important. And we knew at the time that, you know, we could hear in the archive there were male recordists that were sitting there with a microphone on themselves, not even putting the microphone on the lady they're talking to, because it's the 1940s, and that comes with the territory, that this sort of relationship that wasn't much fun, you know. And but it also meant that we had to counter things, and we had to explore the archive a lot more. But it's from a specific time, but also the nature of how it's recorded is from a time. So there is that clip. This is a clip that we didn't put in the film, and it's from the Herring Girls. And you'll see it's from this is an extract from an assembly or a rough cut of the film, and it's a joke that is being told. And in the film, humor was really important. We needed to get some humor in there, so we had this till very late in the film. So I'll sort of play it through, and this isn't in the, this is an outtake, and I'll explain a bit after.
Dasich fugna boidanach ukashach gonosa perúnis og húttagur skattinga nosa bugn khasti. Schara beerlach agisha kuuden en gaulta da sjálni sakat schara gali gerka. Svugna boidanach vach ukashach katu noas svugna bættikin sjúrku jinni stillis skattan skemugna kleten så lava sjava khalich vach ka sjana suide khnoch. Agus noch khalich hele ma khatoy de lechakas. Sanlusti diichini stöj. Agus ne piukas lahaga mangissa netin so siku stöj. Hulle metin so siku tikne bættikin stöj. Läs missjoni so siku Gräkas mistars fetish so koch va daster fatta. Haiste kandis boja noch sin alash. Agus na la haiste kandis. Agus ne de hewlo khalich so. Ide munek ben boja noch kookte ekki vokte skat. Haga de giude dia jidig nie gai de musi voksa. Agus hiude dish. Oh Mr. Cole so show. Belanges in the station and besonders in the station and Kaulus got every day. Agus him that you give that Diagus who's the Norman. What is she saying? Oh, you know, fine, Mr. Cooey, so she what I say. Belanges in the station and besonders in the station and Kaulus got every day. She missed where all the mission.
Okay, so the reason that is maybe an interesting thing to understand is that, so you can see the question marks. When we got this rough subtitling done, there was a lot of bits where the translator was working through things rough, and there was things to come back to. We knew the laughter was great, there was a conversation, we wanted this, if we could get it to work in there. But we also never knew what the joke was about, and we just could not get it. And Joan, the lead subtitler, didn't know. We had a team of three, translators that were working on this as well, and subtitlers, they couldn't know. We put it out to the entire Gaelic academic community, And finally, someone that knew the archive very well said, no, I think what's going on there is actually that the lady that's telling the story is having a joke about the interviewer. And so that isn't a real joke. She is making up words and saying nonsense to see if the interviewer would laugh along, to kind of have a laugh at him. And then obviously that's absolutely untranslatable. We couldn't get in there, but it was about understanding the context of the archive and having a team that could tell us that, rather than us trying to go in and guess what that meant. We had some close guesses, but we didn't think it was right. So at the end of the day, we kind of couldn't use it, but it was a joke on the interviewer in the archive in the 50s, which is a bit of a trap in a way. He fell into the trap of pretending that he got a non-existent joke. So I mean, it unfortunately didn't make the cut, but it does highlight archive itself has politics, it has context, it has everything within it, and you need to be prepared to kind of view it with that lens and have people that can navigate it for you.
It's really interesting to also consider and think about what didn't make it into the film and why, and so I think we have time for just one or two final questions. If anyone would like to post in the chat or just ask away here in the meeting. Oh, I think we have a question from Patrick. So I was interested also at how embodied the fishing song was in the film, talking of the man she'd had the night before and others. I was surprised at that from the author.
Yeah, there was a lot of that actually, but I, to be honest, the versions that were recorded. So I was often on the boats talking to the guys, the fishermen, about the archive and the stories I'd heard, and they knew about the project. Some of them were really into culture and tradition, and some of them weren't. But one or two of them I would sort of say, I found this great story about, it might be the one about the three brothers that die. And then they would say, did you hear this story? And I'd say, actually, I did. We got that translated. I had heard that. And they said, did you hear this version or this version? And the version that was told in the archive to the interviewer was normally the very mild version. The actual real version that carries on today is often even more explicit, if you want, and very funny. And there was a bit of that, and it was great. And why not? I mean, I think the songs, especially from the girls, the singing, the women singers were brilliant, and we wanted to keep that in because it humanized a lot of it. The 40s and 50s, I don't think were necessarily just the time for. It wasn't as standoffish as you think. Yeah, and we did love them, and I think they brought another. They made a link with the people that was really important in this, that were telling the stories. And Nan McKinnon, who tells a lot of the stories that were like that, is a wonderful woman. And there's a few others as well that in the archive that you almost have a real affection for these people that were getting interviewed, because you hear a lot of their stories. And I remember some of the archivists, we asked the archivists, the team of archivists, who were your favorite people? And we're in the middle of the project, people that have spent 15 years on this archive, we went to them as well and said, this is the project. Are there any other recommendations? And they would tell us, but they would also tell us in a really affectionate way they would say, I love this guy so much. I wish I could do this because of this. And it was a very, it's a very intense one-way relationship you have with this archive. And a lot of it is to do with how, a lot of it is to do with the interviewers that were great at the time, and also just how lovely and funny and, sometimes rude the stories were, but they reveal a lot about culture, I think. And I think most Gaels will tell you there are things most jokes seem to be a lot funnier in Gaelic. And actually when the Gaelic audiences we've had that have watched this film laugh tenfold over what an English speaking audience. There's a lot of jokes that aren't able to be translated.
And I think, we have another question about the exhibition of the film and whether you have any plans to present the film in another way outside of the traditional cinema.
Yeah, there is actually, and it's good you see that, because I mean so at the moment we are in this digital release, not necessarily by choice but by timing, and it's an interesting process to go through. At the moment, cinemas may open up with half capacity. I think we are looking more towards August and autumn that we'll get some cinema screenings, and then at the same time the idea of live cinema is important. I mentioned that, but then there is some discussions around outdoor screenings and you know, projections on places, in places, hopefully with people like Screen Machine, but also outside in the world, because this is, you know, in a setting, in a real space, be it a cliff or be it the side of a harbour, there is a sense that the start of this project was about the history of these places. I would be sitting in South Uist and see in the bays and the history that is there, and this archive and audio is about the boats and the places speaking. So we would love to be able to bring that back. And there is some conversations that are happening, and we hope the film, you know, does have a long life, and we think it can. We think there's people that may want to watch this more than once if they. We would like to think it can be viewed in different settings in different ways, and people, yeah, if it were to come back, and in a way some other great films have done in Scotland, that they've had very different lives in different places, and yeah, so the answer is yes, and we are welcome to any weird and wonderful ideas. So.
Thank you. And yeah, so until then, the film is available and will still be available online.
Yeah. Yeah, and you can find a bit more about it. I mean, there's more about the research. There's an article that myself and Magnus Course wrote in The Conversation. The Guardian did another nice piece on the film as well, if you wanted to get a bit more of an idea about it. And yeah, and people can find me as well online. You're welcome to drop me a line if you have questions, also about, you know, a lot of the, if you've got your language projects and you have any dilemmas, then you're welcome to drop me a line. If I can help out, I'm happy to. So yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think on that note, we will wrap up today's masterclass. Thank you very much, Alastair, for joining us today and for sharing the film, for making this film and releasing it online so we could all see it in this context. And I do hope to be able to watch it in a cinema or another place.
Yeah, hopefully we'll all be able to get to the film house and have a North Uist gin or something and enjoy it then.
Yes, definitely. And also to look forward to the album, to Aidan's album.
Yeah, I think that's with anyone with a, yeah, if you haven't checked out Lau or his music, do it, but also the yeah, I think it's a remarkable score for lots of reasons, so it's worth listening to. Great.
And thank you everyone for your great contributions and questions and yeah, reactions to the film. We will have another masterclass coming up next week on the 26th of March with Varda Barkar. So I do suggest you attend that one as well. It's a bit slightly later in the evening from 5 p.m. because we're working with LA time, but I hope you can join us then as well. So again, thank you, Alastair, and thank you everyone, and hope you have a great rest of the day.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.